The room went silent the instant the glass hit my face. Cold water ran down my forehead, soaked my shirt, and dripped onto the polished conference table while 12 executives stared at me as if I had suddenly become invisible. Across from me stood the most powerful woman in the company, her hand still wrapped around the empty glass, her expression hard and impatient. She had just humiliated a man who had spent 15 years helping build her company from the ground up. What she didn't know was that the folder sitting in front of me contained documents that could destroy everything she had spent her life building. Before we uncover what happened next, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances, leave a comment, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad if you believe that treating people with dignity matters, no matter their position in life. My name is Everett Calder, and at 47 years old, I had learned that life could take almost everything from you and still expect you to show up the next morning with a smile. I was a single father raising my 13-year-old son, Micah, in a small apartment on the edge of the city. Every morning began before sunrise. I packed Micah's lunch, checked his school uniform, made sure his homework was in his backpack, and then took the early train downtown to work as a senior operations manager at Veronese Holdings. It wasn't glamorous work, but I was proud of it. I had joined the company when it was barely more than a small technology firm operating out of 2 rented floors. Over the years, I had watched it grow into a multi-million-dollar corporation. I had worked weekends, missed birthdays, slept in conference rooms during major launches, and solved problems nobody else wanted to touch. I never complained because I wasn't working only for myself. Every paycheck meant groceries, school supplies, rent, and a better future for Micah. The company was now led by Celestine Vale, a brilliant 42-year-old CEO known throughout the industry for her intelligence, discipline, and ruthless standards. She had inherited the company after her father retired and had transformed it into something much larger. People respected her, but few genuinely liked her. She believed emotions had no place in business. To her, numbers were truth, weakness was failure, and people were replaceable. I had always kept my distance from her, doing my job quietly and efficiently. That changed on a bright Tuesday morning when she called an emergency executive meeting to discuss a massive contract with an international partner. The contract was worth nearly $80 million, and everyone understood that one mistake could damage the company for years. I entered the boardroom carrying a thick financial folder. I had spent 3 weeks reviewing the contract and discovered something deeply disturbing. Several payment structures had been altered after the legal department approved them. The changes were buried inside hundreds of pages of documents, but they created a financial liability that could eventually cost the company tens of millions. Worse, the approval trail pointed towards someone inside Celestine's executive circle. I didn't know who was responsible, but I knew the company needed to stop the deal immediately. I had prepared the evidence carefully because I believed the truth would protect everyone. Celestine entered the room moments later. She looked immaculate in a charcoal suit, her dark hair tied neatly behind her shoulders. She took her seat at the head of the table and began the meeting without greeting anyone. Presentations moved quickly until I asked for permission to raise a concern about the contract. I explained that the numbers didn't match the original agreement and that several modifications appeared to have been made without proper authorization. The room became uncomfortable. Celestine stared at me across the table. She asked whether I was accusing her executive team of fraud. I calmly explained that I was not accusing anyone, I was asking for an investigation before the contract was finalized. That was when everything went wrong. Celestine looked at the documents, then back at me. Her face tightened. She said I was wasting everyone's time and embarrassing the company in front of senior leadership. I tried to explain that the evidence was in the folder, but she interrupted me. Then, in a moment nobody in that room would ever forget, she reached for a glass of water and threw it directly into my face. The water struck me so suddenly that I froze. My glasses fell onto the table. A few drops landed across the financial documents. Nobody moved. She told me that if I couldn't handle pressure, I had no business sitting at an executive table. Then she ordered security to escort me out. I quietly picked up my glasses and the folder. My hands were shaking, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. As I walked out, I noticed one person watching me with a look of genuine concern. It was Rowan Mercer, the company's longtime legal director. He didn't say anything, but his expression told me he understood that something had gone terribly wrong. I went home that afternoon instead of returning to my office. Micah found me sitting at the kitchen table with a towel around my shoulders. He asked what happened, and I told him I had spilled water on myself. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. He was 13, but he was observant. He looked at my face for several seconds before quietly placing a cup of tea beside me. Then he said something I would remember forever. He told me that sometimes strong people don't look strong because they never get hurt, they look strong because they keep going after they do. That night, I opened my laptop and reviewed every document again. What I discovered changed everything. The altered contract wasn't the only problem. There were 6 other transactions with the same unusual pattern. Money had been redirected through a consulting company that appeared legitimate on paper but was connected to a senior executive's family member. The total exposure was more than $100 million. Someone had been quietly draining the company for years. I contacted Rowan the next morning. He came to my apartment after work and spent 3 hours reviewing the evidence. By midnight, his face had gone pale. He told me that if the documents were authentic, the company was facing a crisis much larger than anyone realized. He also admitted that he had noticed irregularities months earlier but had been pressured to stop asking questions. We decided to bring everything to an independent financial investigator rather than confronting anyone inside the company. For 2 weeks, we worked quietly. The investigator confirmed the records and traced the money. The person behind the scheme wasn't Celestine. It was her chief financial officer, Garrick Sloan, the man who had been sitting only 3 chairs away from her during the meeting. Garrick had manipulated reports, redirected payments, and created false consulting expenses. But there was another painful truth. Celestine's aggressive leadership had made it easy for him to hide. Employees were too afraid to question decisions. Managers avoided bringing bad news to her. People learned to protect themselves instead of protecting the company. When the evidence finally reached the board, an emergency investigation began. Celestine initially refused to believe it. Then the financial records were placed in front of her. Page after page showed exactly what had happened. Her trusted CFO had betrayed her, but the board also concluded that her leadership style had allowed the deception to continue undetected. Celestine resigned before she could be removed. Garrick was fired and later faced serious legal consequences. But the most surprising part came afterward. The board asked me to return. I walked into the same conference room where Celestine had thrown water in my face. This time, there were no insults, no shouting, and no humiliation. The chairman stood and apologized publicly for what had happened to me. He offered me a promotion to Chief Operations Officer. I thanked him, but I asked for something else first. I asked them to create a company policy guaranteeing that employees could report financial or ethical concerns without fear of retaliation. I asked them to establish an independent reporting system and leadership training focused on respect and accountability. The board agreed. Several months later, I was sitting in my new office when Celestine requested a meeting. She looked different. Not weaker, but humbled. She apologized for what she had done. She admitted that she had mistaken fear for respect and control for leadership. I didn't excuse her behavior, but I accepted her apology. I told her that the water she threw in my face had hurt, but the lesson it gave me was more important. It reminded me that a person's position can change overnight, but character is what remains when the title disappears. She nodded quietly. When I returned home that evening, Micah was waiting at the kitchen table. I told him I had been promoted. He smiled and hugged me. Then he asked if things were finally getting better. I looked around our small apartment, at the old couch, the second-hand table, and the backpack resting beside the door, and realized something. Things had already been better. Because my son had taught me that dignity isn't something another person gives you. It's something you refuse to surrender. A year later, Veroni's Holdings was healthier than it had ever been. Employees spoke openly during meetings. Managers listened. Financial controls were stronger. And the company had started a scholarship program for children of employees who were struggling financially. I was asked to name the scholarship. I called it the Second Chance Fund. Because sometimes the person who humiliates you becomes part of the reason your life changes. Sometimes the worst day of your life opens a door you never knew existed. And sometimes one cruel decision doesn't destroy the person it was meant to break. Instead, it exposes the truth and gives that person the courage to stand taller. If this story touched your heart, please don't just watch and move on. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear that their dignity has value, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad for more stories about courage, family, kindness, and second chances. And before the story ends, I have one special request. Comment the words, "Dignity always wins," below if you believe no person should ever be treated as less valuable because of their job, their money, or their position. Because Everett learned something that morning in the boardroom that no promotion could ever teach him. A glass of water can soak a shirt. A cruel moment can break a heart. But when a person chooses to stand back up, even after being humiliated, the truth can become stronger than the person who tried to silence it. And sometimes, the one move meant to destroy everything becomes the very move that changes everything forever.